Good afternoon, guys. Dimitri is here, and today I wanted to talk to you about my Nikon Z6. Here it is, my Nikon Z6 with 24-70 f4 lens. Now Z6 I've had since December of last year. We're in May, and you might think why I waited so long to review this camera, unlike Z7, which I reviewed last year. Well, the reason that I wanted to wait is we all knew that Nikon announced their firmware 2.0 at one point in February or March, and then we had to wait until recently to get the firmware 2.0, which added IAF to Z6. So I wanted to wait to see what this firmware 2.0 brought to the camera, and I wanted to review the camera when I already had the 2.0 on it. If you watch my Z7 review, you've noticed that I was not particularly impressed by Z7, and my review there had several criticisms of the camera, which some of you might not have liked, but I say what I see, which I did with Z7. And after I shot Z7 alongside D850 and D500, I had an opinion that I had. Now, in terms of Z6, when I got my Z6, I didn't have much expectations because I had already reviewed Z7. And if you look at the spec sheets, Z6 is not that much different from Z7, but when I got Z6, I was immediately impressed by how much better it was in terms of autofocus as opposed to Z7. And that was surprising because Z7 had more autofocus points, and overall the cameras are very similar. The software is similar, so you'd think that there wouldn't be much of a difference, but there was, and I could clearly see it from day one. It was just better in focusing in every mode, way, or fashion, and it wasn't just low light when it was already rated better than Z7, but even in good light, the autofocus was just better overall. Continuous tracking was better than Z7, and I wonder why. Perhaps it's because less autofocus points causes less stress on the engine of the camera. I don't know, but the Z6 impressed me from day one. In terms of autofocus, generally I have been happy most of the time with my Z6. Even before firmware 2.0, when I shot people, I have noticed that phase detection, at least with the lenses that I've used it with, which were 24-70 f4 and 51.8 native plus 70-200 and 70-200 2.8 VR2 and Sigmas 35 art and 135 art. When I shot people, phase detection usually had my closest eye in focus majority of the time, even without eye autofocus per se. Of course, when I got eye autofocus, it got even better, in which I've tried this with people walking and stationary toward me, away from me, and eye autofocus generally worked pretty good. Now, it's not as good as Sony. I have Sony A9, and Sony A9 will find an eye when the person is much further away than the Z6. For Z6, the eye have to be on the face of a person that has to be closer to the camera. It's not as bad as my Canon EOS RP, but it's not as good as Sony A9. So Sony A9 and Sony overall, they're still the king when it comes to eye autofocus. But Z6, it was already good before with phase detection, and it gotten even better Now, I have seen the reviews where people said that they had issues with IF and particular lenses such as Nikon's native 105 1.4 E lens, and when it would focus on eyelashes versus the eyeball. I don't personally have that lens, the 105 1.4 E, so I can't really comment on it. But I do have Sigma 135 1.8 Art, and with that lens, when it shows eye, it focuses on the eye, and I'm talking about eyeball and not eyelashes. So I have not had that issue with the Sigma lenses or Nikon lenses that I own, such as 70 to 200 VR2 or 200 to 500 for that matter, or 85 1.8 G. Now, in terms of autofocus with people, all is fine. Now, when it comes to autofocus of fast-moving objects such as birds in flight, it's not all that great. Z6, while it's better than Z7, still not in the same class as D850 or D500. I have not shot with D5, so I cannot comment on it, but D850 or D500 will have a faster initial acquisition, which is big, and it will track more consistently than the Z6. Z6 can do it, but with fast birds, the initial acquisition is not as immediate as it is with a D850 or D500 or my Sony A9. But when it finds the bird, or if it's a slower bird, such as ducks flying or pelicans, it will generally be able to track the bird. But what happens is, and I'm talking about 200 to 500 lens, which is majority of the shooting that I've done in terms of birds in flight. You have a series of shots, and not every shot is in focus, which basically you'll have one shot in focus, one shot out of focus, then a couple of shots in focus, couple of shots out of focus. So the keeper rate was not there. It was better than Z7, and you still will get keepers, but it was not as great as Nikon DSLRs, just not in the same ballpark even. But with people, I've had no problems. People stationary, people walking toward me, away from me, even people running. I had no. It's with something that is more challenging, such as birds in flight. I had problems with Z6, and I would not recommend using Z6 for if your primarily type of photography is birds in flight with tele lenses, and that has been my experience. Now, when we're talking about something that is not as challenging, such as surfers, I did with 70 to 200 surfing. That's easy for Z6, but that's also easy for a lot of other cameras. So that's autofocus. People great, birds in flight, not all great. Other than that, I have no problems with this camera. The DR is great. The picture quality is excellent. The low light noise is probably one of the best I've experienced, and I've shot with every Nikon other than D5 and all the Sonys, all the latest Sonys, A7 III, A7R3, A9. It's just as good. The tops. I have not shot with Panasonic S1, so I can't. Some people say that that's great in low light, even though DxO does not tell you that. But I personally have not shot with Panasonics, and I never comment on cameras that I personally have not experienced. In terms of the battery life on Z6, I have no problems with battery life. Last Thursday, I took my camera to shoot my child, do indoor basketball, and I can tell you that I shot about 850 pictures, mostly in series. either in high plus, which is 12 frames per second, or high, which is 5.5. And essentially, after 850 pictures, my battery showed 85% left. So I shot 850 pictures and consumed only 15% of the battery, which is better than I had with D850 or D500 without the grip. So, but I just want to let you know that I have airplane mode on my Z6. With airplane mode off, the camera does eat more energy. So if you want to keep the battery if you want to make sure that your battery lasts long, have airplane mode on. And it didn't matter that I was and I wasn't saving in terms of, some people don't do review. I had image review on, and I used both display and the viewfinder EVF, and still got 850 pictures and with plenty of battery left. So the battery life is, to me, not a problem at all. In terms of one card slot, so far I hadn't had any incidents of XQD card failure with either Z6 or Z7 before that, or D850. Never had any problems. So that hasn't been a problem for me. So image quality is great. The autofocus generally is great. One other issue that I've had with Z6 is the fact that it lacks the 3D autofocus. I mean, it has it, but it lacks it in terms of how you activate it on previous Nikon DSLRs, such as D850, D500, and before that, where you can just select an object and the camera will just track that object without you having to press OK and having to click on something on screen, that object. It just makes things slower. And I know that this is something that I hoped that Nikon would address. In firmware 2.0 it was not addressed, and I hope that Nikon addresses it in next firmware down the line. And we'll just add the same 3D mode that D850, D500, and other Nikon cameras have. Now, in terms of lenses, the lens selection. The first lenses that Nikon have came up with, some people say are not very exciting because they're either f4 lenses or, well, other than the 24 to 70 2.8 zoom, or the primes, which like 50 or 35, which is 1.8, which is kind of opposite direction from what Canon is doing with its RF line, when they went for 1.2 lenses and such, which are much more exciting lenses. However, the RF lenses are also huge and very expensive. The 51.2 costs $2,300. So the Nikon went more affordable route, I should say, which I appreciate. The 51.8 is not as crazy expensive, and 35.1.8 is not insanely expensive like Canon RF lenses. And the fact that there are smaller lenses also makes it easier to travel with the Z6 because the lenses are smaller and balance much better. Here's 24 to 70. Here's the 50. Of course, I got the adapter, and I adapt other lenses on Z6. And my next lens for Z6 will be 14 to 30. I think 14 to 30 would be great for travel. Also, small factor lens, so that would be great. So happy with Z6. Generally happy with that camera. It's not all perfect in terms of autofocus tracking when it comes to, as I said, ultimate like small birds and things such as that. But for that, I have Sony A9, which is absolutely amazing. But for other things, Z6 is very good. And now with the $200 discount and free adapter, which I had to pay full price and I paid for the adapter, I think it's a very good deal. Another thing I wanted to add before I forgot is that I'm kind of excited about the adapters that are coming out for the Nikon Z mount. It appears that the company called TechArt is making one which is in the last stages, which will autofocus Sony FE lenses on Z6. And Sony FE has some great lenses that came out in the last 6 years, such as the 85-1.4 GM, brilliant lens, and some others, which I don't see yet on Nikon roadmap. So I'm kind of excited about that. And I also have heard that somebody is developing an adapter for Canon EF lenses. So if that all comes through, then we'll have a camera that is capable of shooting Z lenses, Nikon f-mount lenses, Canon EF lenses, and Sony FE mount lenses. So we'll have the best of all world. Basically, you'll be able to mount any lens on your Z camera and still autofocus, which is going to be kind of exciting. Thank you for watching. Leave your comments, subscribe to my channel, and I will talk to you again when it's time for a next camera or lens review. Thank you.